So it's March of 2013, and I once again find myself in a hospital room with my dad in bed, and he'd been ill for the past 2 years, and we'd been in and out of the hospital and hoping for the best. He continued to believe he was headed back to Africa. 13 years earlier, he had begun ministering in Africa for the first time, and over the 13 years had really built a group of young leaders who were from very rural areas that he had raised up as sons. In fact, he was known there as Papa John. So now it's morning. I'd spent the night, and my mom had come to relieve me and to be with Dad for some time, and I stepped out to bring her up to speed with what had happened since she'd last been there. And as we spoke for a couple of minutes, all of a sudden there was a lot of commotion and a code called and a team running into my dad's room, and a nurse emerged and said, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your dad's taken his last breath. So while I was catching my breath, his time on the earth had ended. So obviously there was a significant loss felt not only by his immediate family, myself and Mom and my brothers and sisters, and also those who loved him, who he'd shared with around the U.S. and also in Africa. Within a couple weeks, the board had come and said, John, we know this happened suddenly. We weren't really expecting it. But in order for the ministry to carry on, you're going to need to step in as director now. Otherwise, we're going to need to dissolve the ministry. Well, my wife and I prayed about it, as we'd been already considering that at some point in the future that transition would happen. We knew that this was the time to step in. So I began to visit East Africa as much as I could for that next year, to visit with the brothers, to grieve with them, but also to hear their hearts and understand what vision did they have for the future. And as I met with them and traveled and walked through some of these villages and slums, a vision began to be birthed in my heart. And I really felt the Lord said, John, your dad ministered to lots of leaders in the rural areas, but now it's time to have 4 of those leaders and to work with them in their particular communities and really begin to help them develop and see the kingdom be expressed in those communities. I felt like he said, I want to break the cycle. I want to break the cycle of poverty, both spiritually and physically, emotionally, in every way. I want to do that by giving and breathing into these people destiny and purpose. So, of course, I'm like, well, Lord, that sounds awesome, but how do you accomplish that? This is a big slum. These are big communities. How would you go about that? And I felt like he very clearly said, John, take the 3 to 5-year-olds. Begin to breathe destiny and purpose into their hearts, into their young hearts that have not yet been hardened into cycles of poverty. And to do that, you'll need to start a school that you can begin raising these up, because in 15 years, your 3-year-olds will be 18, your 5-year-olds will be 20, and those 15 to 20-year-olds will begin to change the community from the inside out. So I'm very excited to say we now have 2 schools with 250 students, and the other 2 we'd like to open by the end of the year. And that's why we've started the $1ADayClub.org. So if you would, consider joining us. It's only $1 a day. You can't even buy a cup of coffee for $1 a day. But what does come with $1 a day is a breakfast and lunch, probably the only 2 meals of most of these children that we have in school. Pays for their teachers, the administrators, it pays for the social and health worker, pays for the buildings, uniforms. It's amazing what $1 a day can do in the life of a child. It gives us the opportunity to breathe destiny and purpose and to raise up the leaderships and those that are going to bring light into these very dark places. So if you would, click the button below and join today.